Today's video wasn't scheduled. I should be posting my final wardrobe build video, but so many jobs around the house aren't planned. They just rudely muscle to the top of the queue when they need doing. And so it was with our toilet, which developed a fault recently in the inlet fill valve. So I thought I'd do a quick video today on this because I've learned so much in the process of upgrading all of the mechanism in our cistern, from the old single flush siphon to a dual flush valve system. And before I start, if you want to find out what I get up to in between my YouTube videos, it'd be great if you could come and follow me on TikTok and Instagram. If you use those platforms, I'm at DIYte, and you'll find shorter, more regular video clips and the occasional live stream. I'd really appreciate you supporting me on these platforms, and I'll post links in the description below this video. So this is a close coupled toilet, so called because the cistern sits directly on the toilet pan. It's actually bolted down, rather than, for example, in a sealed unit behind. And although relatively modern, installed about 11 years ago, it came with a traditional single flush siphon. And it's been a problem ever since a plumber installed it when we moved into the cottage in 2010. The bolt on the fill valve was plastic and kept bending, so I had to replace it with this metal bolt which has long since rusted. And the siphon leaked from day one out of the bottom of the cistern, which I eventually managed to remedy with a load of gutter seal. So I needed a new fill valve, and typically in this situation, to make your life as easy as possible, you'd want to replace the fill valve without interfering with anything else. Because don't forget, the fill valve and the flush system operate entirely independently. The fill valve, as the name suggests, fills the system with water, and the flush mechanism deposits that water into the pan. However, as you can see here, the valve itself was stuck underneath the siphon flush valve. So replacing it would mean completely decoupling and removing from the wall the cistern in order to get to the flush mechanism to remove it. So I thought, as I was doing all this, I'd take the opportunity to also replace the flush mechanism with a new dual flush valve. And this is where it got quite interesting, because I knew nothing about dual flush valves or fill valves before I started researching for this video. And even though I installed this toilet a couple of years ago, neither I nor the rest of my family realised that if you pull the lever up, rather than pushing it down, you've got a half flush. Handy where, like me, you've got a water meter. For the fill valve, even though I didn't end up using it, thanks go to James at Plumber Parts for recommending me this Veebath Skylo unit with its brass thread, superior to the plastic thread options that are out there. And for those of you thinking, why didn't you just buy a new valve to match the old one and simply replace the relevant bit? I would say, why would I replace a flawed component with a new one that's going to fail in exactly the same way with its flawed plastic bolt? I mean, look, it even looks rubbish in the picture, when the fill valves these days are far, far superior to the old bullcock systems. But it's a little more complicated for the flush system, because I could have kept my old ceramic lever and bought a dual flush height adjustable siphon like this one from Veebath or Thomas Dudley, which can even be serviced without having to remove the cistern. But after years of having to strip down and repair siphons in our other toilet, and loving the light touch you get with the dual flush valve lever, as you see here in our bathroom, I decided it was time to ditch the siphon altogether. Veebath also do a flush valve with button and handle options, and also dual cradles. I'll come on to the significance of that in a minute, but unfortunately it has a much too contemporary handle, so I bought a Veebath brass threaded fill valve and dual flush valve on Amazon, matching what I had in the bathroom cistern you saw a few moments ago. With the mains water feed turned off at the isolating valve, I could flush the cistern to remove the majority of the water from it, and then sponge out the remainder into a bucket. I then undid the mains feed to the fill valve and removed the wing nuts that attached the cistern to the pan. This wing nut has completely fallen off, incredibly. Removing the screws that fixed the cistern to the wall was a bit more tricky, as they were both badly rusted. The first one came out easily with the aid of my offset screwdriver bit, and the second was too rusted, so I ground down the sides of the screw with my power file, giving me two flat edges to grab onto with my adjustable wrench. I could then finally remove the cistern. Notice the water on the inside of the rubber washer. Even with all that gutter seal, the cistern was still leaking. I then used my water pump or adjustable pliers to remove the plastic nut that clamped the flush siphon in place. It was then time to remove the corroded system lever arm and remove the lever from the cistern. And I'll be modifying this bit later on. At this point I removed the gutter seal residue with multi-solved spray and years of grime that had built up around the cistern. I then realised that the flush valve I'd bought had a 2-inch outlet cradle, too large for the 1.5-inch aperture on the cistern. So I'm not suggesting you're going to be as stupid as I was, but clearly it's better to only order your flush valve after you've taken apart the cistern so that you can check the outlet size. Or you could order something like the Veebath flush valve, which has 2 different sizes of cradle which are interchangeable. And this is what I found incredibly frustrating, because whilst this cradle is removable, they don't give you the option of choosing between the 2 cradle sizes, like for example Veebath do. So I eventually found this almost identical flush valve with a 1.5-inch outlet on it. And crucially, I can use my chrome handle that came with the other flush valve on this new one. This, to my mind, is incredibly frustrating because, as you can see here, the cradle on this new flush valve can be used with the first flush valve I bought. But nowhere on the market does there seem to be the option of choosing between the 2 cradles without, as I've done here, having by trial and error had to buy both flush valves. So I've ended up spending £65 where I could have bought a complete cistern repair pack on eBay for £36.75, albeit the fill valve doesn't have a brass thread. But I'm not worried because that additional flush valve has come in very handy, as you'll see later on. And so we're on to the fill valve installation. As you can see here, you can adjust the height of it by taking the clip out, rotating it, and then raising or lowering it to the desired height before rotating again and locking it in place to prevent the fill valve rotating. If you look inside my cistern, you can see this line here. Often they're much clearer than this, but I think the manufacturers put that in to say that is your maximum fill line. So I can roughly get this height right now. I know that when the water comes to this point, it pulls the valve up and stops any more water coming in. So that's 195 millimeters. And if I pull that float up, that's stopping it pretty much bang on that level. So I'm going to lock my valve off there. There's 2 things I like about this valve. I like the brass shank, and I also like this rubber seal, which is going to fit beautifully into the inlet point there to create a really good watertight seal. In marked contrast to the old one, which seemed to need a load of plumber's mate to make it watertight. I'm not going to overly tighten this. I'm just going to do a couple of half turns. So the new inlet fill valve is now in position. So the other thing is you've got a certain amount of adjustment on these flush valves, and the instructions that come with them are a little bit confusing at best, I personally think. Bottom line is this: you've got full adjuster button here, which you move up or down, up to decrease the flush, down to increase the flush, and also you've got 2 ways of adjusting the half flush, which is basically when you pull the lever up rather than down. You've got this float valve in here, which weirdly is different on these 2 otherwise identical flush valves. On this one, you don't have a clip that can be pressed in to alter the height of the float. So it looks like you have to sort of do it manually, which I didn't realize until I just forced it just now. And also, so that's for major adjustment, again, all the way down to maximize the half flush, all the way up to minimize the half flush. And that's the major adjustments. And then you've got minor adjustments for the half flush on this little dial here. Again, down to maximize the half flush, up to minimize. So I'm going to set that for now on 3, and I'm going to set the half, the more minute adjustment on the half adjuster at 3 as well. I'm going to put the full flush at 1 to maximize it, because at the end of the day, whilst we're trying to save water, but if if the main flush doesn't flush enough water through the bowl, then I'm going to be doing it twice anyway, which kind of defeats the object of trying to save water. I'm going to put these nuts, these bolts back into my rear clamp. And then it's a couple of half turns with the pliers. The cistern had been badly installed to the rear wall, and so I removed the inadequate wall plugs and replaced them with two 8x40 Fisher Duo Power. These particular brown plugs are also a favourite of mine for fixing into brickwork. That slips in beautifully. I also bought this new 1.5-inch rubber washer because the old one was showing signs of perishing. You can buy entire coupling kits online. However, on fixing the cistern in place, I realised it was badly off level when originally installed, so I marked where the plumber should have installed it and created two hardwood pegs to knock into the existing holes so that I could re-drill the wall right next to the old holes without the drill bit slipping into them. With the cistern finally, after 11 years, now level, I loosely screwed the wing nuts back on to clamp the cistern down to the pan and anchored the cistern to the wall using these 10x2.5-inch screws, sandwiched between 4 rubber washers from this new set I bought recently from Amazon. The cistern had always been loose but was now rock solid against the wall. The last major job was to connect the new ceramic lever to the cistern and flush mechanism. That would ordinarily be like that, but I can't have it like that because of the angle inside. I need it to come out at 90 degrees. So what I've got to do now is cut this bit of perspex to the profile of the cistern. Like that basically. And I did this with my Ryobi belt sander, tidying up the edges with some 400 grit sandpaper, leaving the simple task of fixing the lever in position. I don't think I'm going to put that rubber washer on because I need a thread, crucial thread space on here. The final job was to reconnect the mains water feed to the fill valve and to turn the water back on at the isolating valve, which the plumber had not so handily located in another room. Watch the system fill back up and note with satisfaction the float on the fill valve kicking in at exactly the right point. So far so good, no leaking and no dripping from underneath the cistern yet. And that was it. All that remained was for me to check the volumes of the full and half flush, which I think are spot on. But it wasn't quite it, because I've also put some bituminous paint on the screw heads to stop them rusting, being careful not to get any on the rubber, as petroleum-based paints and lubricants can rot rubber washers. But what about that spare flush valve I bought? Well, actually it's come in really handy, because now that I understand how these things worked, I tried to set the flush in the bathroom cistern at the same as I had for the newly refurbished cistern downstairs. But in spite of setting the half flush settings to the maximum, the half flush was inadequate, as you can see here. So what I did, without even turning off the water supply, was unhitch the old flush valve from its cradle and replace it with the new one. And as you can see, the half flush is now operating perfectly. That's better. So that's it for today. I hope you found that useful if, for example, you're planning an upgrade to one of the cisterns in your house or flat. If you have found it useful, it'd be great if you could give it a thumbs up below. As usual, details of all the tools that I've used or referred to in today's video will be in the description after the video, which, don't forget, you can access on your smartphone by clicking on the little arrow and on your PC by clicking on the Show More button. I'm off to finish the final video in my wardrobe build now, which will hopefully be coming out next week. Which leaves me to say, if you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. Thanks for watching, see you soon.